The hardest stories are never about the battles you lose. They are about the ones you win, and what they cost you to win them. And the rarest stories, the ones that live forever, are about the people who look at the cost and say, it was worth every single thing. The penthouse was different now. It had been different since March, since Sora Amara arrived and immediately began reorganizing the universe according to her own specifications. There was a baby monitor on the kitchen counter where the Darjeeling tea used to live. There was a small forest of infant toys beside the Italian leather sofa. There was a framed photograph on the wall that had not been there before, taken at the Lagos compound on the day of the naming ceremony, of Kwon Jae-won, 62 years old, iron-willed billionaire, former shadow power of South Korea, holding a 9-pound baby girl against his chest with the expression of a man who had finally been thoroughly and permanently defeated by something smaller than his forearm. He looked happier in that photograph than in any image taken of him in the previous 40 years. Adaze was feeding Sora in the kitchen when the call came. 9 months of feeding, changing, singing Igbo lullabies at 3 in the morning while her husband, who had once managed international empires from this same apartment, sat up beside her in the dark, learning the words to the lullaby syllable by syllable, refusing to go back to sleep until he had them right. He had them right now. She heard him singing them from the nursery some mornings, low and slightly off-key and absolutely committed. She pressed her lips to Sora's head and thought, this is what I waited for. Not the penthouse, not the empire, not the extraordinary biography of the man she had married. This. His voice in the nursery, the monitor on the counter, the way he said good morning in both Korean and Igbo now every single day because their daughter was going to grow up with both. She was still thinking this, still full of it, the quiet unbearable goodness of it, when her fingers, moving automatically, found something that stopped her completely. She sat very still. Sora looked up at her with those enormous dark eyes, curious about the stillness. Adaze looked down at her daughter. Then she picked up her phone and dialed Dr. Seo. He arrived on a Wednesday. The Kwon Empire Group headquarters in Gangnam District was accustomed to powerful arrivals. Chairmen, foreign dignitaries. The occasional government minister who needed something managed quietly. The lobby staff had been trained to receive everyone with equal deference regardless of what they were wearing or what they carried. But the young Korean man who walked through the glass doors at 11 in the morning on that Wednesday was not carrying power. He was carrying a manila envelope and 30 years of questions. He was 30 years old. Lean, the kind of lean that comes from a life that was never particularly comfortable. Dark hair, sharp features with an angularity that was specific and familiar in a way that none of the lobby staff could immediately place. He walked to the reception desk. He placed the envelope on the counter. He said, "My name is Kwon Min-jun. I need to speak with Kwon Jae-won. I'm not on any appointment list, but if someone takes this envelope to him and he reads the first page, he will see me." The receptionist looked at the envelope, then at the young man. There was something about the jaw, the eyes. She picked up the phone. Jae-won was in the middle of a legal briefing regarding the Kwon Empire's ongoing restructuring when his personal assistant stepped in and said very quietly that there was someone in the lobby who was requesting an urgent meeting. He looked up. Who? He said his name is Kwon Min-jun. He left this. She placed a single page on the table. Jae-won looked at it. It was a DNA analysis report. He picked it up, read it, set it down. The briefing room was absolutely silent. Then he said very calmly, "Give us the room." He sat alone for 11 minutes, not moving, not calling anyone, not doing what the Empire Builder version of himself would have done, activating resources, running verifications, consulting lawyers. He sat with a DNA report that said, in the unambiguous language of science, that a 30-year-old man named Kwon Min-jun shared 99.97% of his genetic material with Kwon Jae-won. He thought about a woman named Han So-yeon. 32 years ago. He had been 32 years old. a year after Song Yu-jin, during the years he had spent converting heartbreak into empire building with the focused savagery of a man who refused to feel anything he couldn't use. There had been a period, brief and uncharacteristic, where he had tried to be normal, to date normally, to be someone other than what he was becoming. So-yeon had been warm and intelligent, and she had liked him genuinely, which had frightened him more than anything else, which was precisely why he had eventually retreated back into the work. He had never known. He pressed both hands flat on the table. He had a 30-year-old son he had never known existed. And somewhere on the other side of the city, his wife of 14 months was at a medical appointment she had told him was a routine follow-up. He stood up, made a decision, called his assistant. Send him up. Min-jun walked into the executive office and stopped, because whatever he had prepared himself for, coldness, denial, lawyers, a screen of corporate distance, the man standing on the other side of the desk was none of those things. Kwon Jae-won, 62 years old, was simply standing there, looking at him. And the look on his face was the one thing Min-jun had never been able to prepare for. Recognition. Not practiced, not performed. The raw, immediate cellular recognition of a man looking at his own blood for the first time. Min-jun had his father's jaw, his father's posture, his father's specific stillness under pressure. That quality of going quieter the more something mattered. Jae-won saw all of it in 3 seconds. Min-jun said, "Were you ever told about me?" The question that had been living in his chest for 3 years since his mother died. The question that had kept him awake and propelled him across Seoul and made him put a DNA report on a reception desk like a man betting everything on a single throw. Jae-won said, "No." One word. Absolute. Without defense. Min-jun studied him. "I need to know if you're saying that because it's true or because it's convenient." "I spent 2 hours this morning reading everything I could find about Han So-yeon after I saw that report," Jae-won said quietly. "I know she died 3 years ago. I know she raised you in Incheon. I know she worked 2 jobs for most of your childhood. I know that none of that was necessary. That I had resources that could have changed every part of your life, and I didn't know because she chose not to tell me." He paused. "I don't say that to excuse myself. A better man would have made sure she had what she needed regardless. I wasn't a better man at 32. The office was very quiet. "Are you now?" Min-jun asked, not with hostility, with the genuine, guarded, necessary caution of a 30-year-old man who has learned that hope is expensive. Jae-won thought about the most honest answer he could give. "I'm trying," he said. "I have a wife who would tell you I'm significantly improved and a 9-month-old daughter who would tell you I have no idea what I'm doing. Both of them are correct." Something moved in Min-jun's face, something almost involuntary. "You have a daughter. Her name is Sora Amara. She is 9 months old and she already understands that she runs this family." For the first time, just briefly, Min-jun almost smiled. She didn't tell him that evening. She sat through dinner, Jae-won clearly carrying something enormous from his day, carefully not asking her about hers. And she watched him hold Sora and sing the lullaby and put the baby to bed with the particular focused tenderness that still, after 9 months, made her catch her breath every time. She didn't tell him because she needed to know more first. She needed to know how large the thing she was carrying actually was before she asked him to carry it with her. Because that was who she was. Had always been, even in the part of her that was still learning to stop protecting people she loved from the truth. Dr. Seo had been gentle, precise. "There is a mass, Adais, in the left breast. The preliminary imaging is concerning. I want to do a biopsy before I say anything more definitive." What does concerning mean? It means I don't want to give you a diagnosis based on imaging alone, but I want to do the biopsy this week. She had nodded, made the appointment, walked out of the clinic into the Seoul afternoon with the same composure she had walked into every other room that had tried to reduce her. She pressed her grandmother's bracelet with her right hand as she hailed a taxi. She did not cry. She thought, I have survived everything else. Then she thought, but Sora is 9 months old, and that thought, the specific, irreversible tenderness of that thought, was the one that came closest to undoing her on the taxi ride home. She told him 3 days later, after the biopsy, after the results, after she knew the actual shape of what she was dealing with, she chose the kitchen. Early morning, Sora asleep, the Ixora plant on the table, the same one she had bought to announce her pregnancy, replaced now by its second iteration, because the first had eventually finished blooming and she had gone to find another. He had noticed months ago that she always made sure there were Ixora flowers somewhere in the home. He had never asked why. He had simply, the following week, arranged for a regular delivery. She waited until he had his tea, then she said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything. He set the cup down. He looked at her, those dark, watchful eyes that had been watching her since a penthouse dinner table 3 years ago, that had never stopped watching, that watched her now with the specific quality of attention she had come to understand meant he was giving her every resource he had. She told him, Stage 2, left breast, highly treatable with the correct protocol. Surgery followed by a course of chemotherapy and radiation. The oncologist's assessment was cautiously optimistic. The cancer had not spread to the lymph nodes. Her age and overall health were on her side. The treatment would be difficult, but the prognosis was, his words, genuinely favourable. She said all of it without stopping. The way she delivered every important thing, completely, clearly, without softening the edges. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet. Jaewon had not moved. She watched him process it. She had seen this man receive news of assassination attempts, billion-dollar losses, government seizures, the death of his brother, the betrayal of his closest lieutenant, the revelation that his uncle had committed 40 years of undetected crime. She had never seen his face do what it did now. It didn't collapse. It didn't perform strength. It did something in between, something more honest than either. The face of a man absorbing a blow that has gone through every layer of defense and landed somewhere nothing has ever reached before. He said, How long have you known? 3 days. I wanted the full picture before I told you. You have been carrying this for 3 days. I was protecting you. Ada. Just her name. Just that. I know, she said quietly. I know. I'm sorry. He stood up slowly, walked around the table, crouched in front of her the way he had crouched in the Lagos factory on the morning everything broke and rebuilt, on the same level as her, neither above nor below. He took both her hands. His grip was firm, certain, the grip that had never wavered. Tell me what you need, he said. Not tell me what to do. Not I'll handle it. Not any version of the empire builder reaching for control. Tell me what you need. She looked at him. I need you to not cancel your life for me, she said. I need you to keep being her father and my husband, and not make this illness the center of everything we are. I need a daze. What? I'm going to do all of those things, he said, and I am also going to be in every single room with you. Every appointment, every treatment, every day this takes. That is not negotiable. That is not cancelling my life. That is my life. She looked at him for a long time. Then she pressed her forehead against his, and this time, unlike in the Lagos factory, she let herself cry. Not alone. Not quietly. Properly. With full sound and full salt, and the full weight of everything she felt. The fear she had been carrying for 3 days, the specific terror of having something worth staying for and not knowing if she would get to stay. He held her through all of it, completely steady, like a man who has learned, finally after everything, that the most powerful thing he can do is not fix, but remain. Minjun came back. Not because Jaewon had asked him to. He had deliberately not asked, understanding instinctively that this was a man who needed to choose his own direction at his own pace. He came back because Adaize had called him. She had found out about Minjun the morning after she told Jaewon about the diagnosis. The two truths landing in their home within 18 hours of each other, the universe apparently deciding that if it was going to test them, it would do so thoroughly. Jae-won had told her carefully, watching her face for reactions she might not express. She had asked 2 questions. How old is he? 30. Does he know about Sora? Yes. He seemed... I don't know. He seemed like someone trying to decide whether good news was allowed. Adaize had nodded slowly. The next morning, while Jae-won was on a call, she had asked his assistant for Min-jun's contact number. She had sent him a message. My name is Adaize Kwon. I am Jae-won's wife. I would like to meet you, if you are willing. Not with him. Just us first. There are things it will be easier to hear from me than from him. This is not a test. I am simply someone who understands what it is to receive complicated news about this family and need a neutral person to process it with. Min-jun had stared at the message for a long time. Then he had replied, When? They met in a small cafe in Mapo. Deliberately not any place associated with the Kwon Empire, not any place that would feel like territory. Adaize arrived first. Gold bracelet, simple dark coat, Sora in a baby carrier against her chest. Warm and drowsy and completely unfazed by being in a cafe. Min-jun walked in and stopped when he saw the baby. He had known, intellectually, that there was a 9-month-old half-sister. But intellectual knowledge and the actual physical reality of a small round-faced baby with enormous dark eyes blinking at him from a carrier against a Nigerian woman's chest were 2 entirely different experiences. He sat down. He looked at Sora. Sora looked at him with the frank, total assessment that babies give strangers before deciding their verdict. Then she reached out one tiny hand in his direction. Something happened in Min-jun's face. Adaize watched it happen. The thing she had been waiting to see since she'd read Jae-won's description of him. The thing underneath the 30 years of careful armor. He was lonely. He had always been lonely. He reached out one finger. Sora grabbed it with both hands. He made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite anything nameable. Adaize picked up her tea. She does that to everyone, she said. It's a strategy. She's already figured out that skin contact makes people trust her. She's 9 months old. She is a Kwon. They are born knowing how rooms work. He looked up. She met his eyes, warm, direct, without any performance of what she thought he needed from her. Ask me anything, she said. I mean that. Anything you want to know about your father, about this family, about what happened and why. I have no investment in protecting anyone's image. I only arrived in this story 2 years ago myself. Min-jun studied her. He said you were... He described you as... What did he say? Min-jun almost smiled. He said you were the most straightforward person he had ever met, and that it had taken him 2 years to fully stop being alarmed by it. Adaize laughed, the full, real one that had been undoing people since a Seoul airport arrivals hall. That, she said, is the most accurate thing he has ever said about me. The surgery came first. Jae-won was there, not in the corridor, not in the waiting room. He had arranged, through means that were technically irregular, and involved a private donation to the hospital's new oncology wing, to be permitted in the pre-op room until the moment she was taken through. He held her hand until the doors required him to let go. And then he sat in the private waiting room for 4 hours and 40 minutes, alone, because he had not told anyone except Chisholm. And Chisholm was in Lagos managing the foundation, and he had specifically deliberately not called his mother or Min-jun or any of the people who would have come immediately and filled the silence with love but also taken from him the privacy of being afraid. When the surgeon came out, Jae-won stood. The surgery went well, clear margins. We are optimistic about what we found. The oncology team will discuss the follow-up protocol with you both tomorrow. Jae-won said, Thank you. Then he sat back down, pressed both hands over his face, and allowed himself for exactly 4 minutes to feel everything he had been holding with absolute steadiness for 3 weeks. Then he put it away, stood up, and went to find his wife. Chemotherapy began 6 weeks after surgery, Adaz had been characteristically thorough in her preparation. She had read everything. She had asked the oncologist every possible question. She had organized the schedule around Sora's care, around the Foundation's operations, around Jaewon's restructuring work, refusing to let the treatment become the organizing principle of the household. The first session was at 9 in the morning. Jaewon drove her himself. He sat beside her through every hour of the first infusion, in a chair he had apparently arranged to have permanently reserved in the treatment suite, along with a side table for his laptop, because he had grasped correctly that Adaez would be less comfortable if he sat there doing nothing and would feel better if he was working while she was treated. So he worked, and periodically looked up to check on her, and periodically she looked up from her own book to check on him. They were, the nurses later agreed among themselves in whispers, the most quietly extraordinary couple any of them had ever treated. It was Min Jun who broke first. He had been receiving updates from Adaez's messages, brief, factual, deliberately undramatic in her characteristic style. First session complete. Tired but fine. Sora has decided crawling is beneath her and is attempting to walk at 9 months. Classic. He had been responding with equally brief messages, telling himself he was being respectful of their space, telling himself this was not his family in any fully established sense and he should not insert himself. He lasted 3 weeks. Then he appeared at the penthouse. No call ahead, just a knock. Jaewon opened the door. Min Jun stood there with a container of homemade doenjang jjigae, the fermented soybean stew, which was slightly alarming because the smell was magnificent and Jaewon had been trying and failing to cook the same dish for months. "My mother taught me," Min Jun said without preamble. "She said it was the only Korean dish with the authority to make a sick person feel less sick. I don't know if that's medical fact or not, but—" "Come in," Jaewon said. The fourth treatment session landed on a Thursday that also happened to be a day when Jaewon had an unavoidable meeting with the Government Restructuring Committee. The one that had been scheduled for 2 months and involved 3 ministries and could not, his legal team informed him, be rescheduled without significant consequences to the Empire's legitimacy negotiations. He had been planning to cancel it anyway. Adaez had found out and had spent 20 minutes explaining in careful, precise, absolutely immovable terms why he was going to attend the meeting. "The session is 4 hours. Chisholm is flying in tomorrow. Today Min Jun has offered to come. You will be at your meeting and then you will come directly to the hospital, and I will still be there and everything will be fine. Ada, J. Just his name, just that. Go to the meeting." He went to the meeting. Min Jun went to the hospital. He arrived at the treatment suite at 9 in the morning and sat down in the chair beside Adaez's recliner with the same expression Jaewon wore when he sat there. The expression of a person who has decided to be present regardless of how uncomfortable presence feels. Adaez looked at him. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know," he said. "You've known me for 3 weeks. You're my sister's mother," he said, and then appeared mildly alarmed at his own words, as if they had arrived before his permission. A silence. "Is that what I am?" Adaez said carefully. Min Jun looked at his hands. I haven't figured out the exact language for what any of this is. I grew up as an only child. I grew up without a father. I grew up—" He stopped. "My mother was a good woman. She worked extremely hard and she loved me and she made a decision I understand, even if you're angry about it." He looked up. "I'm not angry at her," he said. "Not anymore. I was. For a long time after she died, I was furious because she left me the DNA report and the name and nothing else. No explanation. No letter. Just the information and the silence, and the implication that she thought I deserved to know but didn't know how to be the one to tell me." He paused. "I think she was afraid. Not of my father. Of what it would mean if she told him and he rejected it. I think she protected me from a rejection that might not have happened because she couldn't guarantee that it wouldn't." Adaez listened. Completely. The way she always listened. Twice as long as she spoke. "What do you think would have happened?" she asked. If she had told him? Minjun was quiet for a long time. I think, he said slowly, that 32-year-old Jaewon was not the man I've met in the last 3 weeks. I think the man I've met is the man he became because of everything that happened between then and now, including you. Adaze sat with that. The IV dripped. The treatment suite hummed with its quiet mechanical purpose. Your mother wasn't wrong to be afraid, she said finally. 32-year-old Jaewon was building walls faster than he was building companies. But 30-year-old Minjun deserves the 62-year-old version. That's the one worth knowing. Minjun looked at her. How are you this... He searched for the word. Calm. I was going to say clear. How are you this clear about everything? She looked down at the IV in her arm. I'm not clear about everything, she said quietly. I'm terrified. Most mornings, I have a 9-month-old daughter and I'm 57 years old and I am sitting in a chemotherapy chair and I am absolutely terrified that I won't get to see what she becomes. The honesty of it landed in the room. But clarity, she continued, is what I have instead of certainty. I can't be certain about anything, but I can be clear about who I love, about what matters, about what I refuse to let this take from me even while it takes other things. She paused. Your mother was clear, Minjun. She was clear about protecting you. She made the wrong decision for the right reasons. People do that. The ones who love us most often do that. Minjun stared at the floor for a long time. Then he said very quietly, I think I needed to hear that from someone who wasn't him. I know, she said. That's why I called you first. It happened on a night between the 5th and 6th treatment sessions. Adaze was asleep. The side effects had been building, fatigue, nausea, the specific desolation of a body being put through a necessary war. And she now slept deeply and early in a way she never had before. Sora was asleep. The penthouse was quiet in the way it had been quiet in the prologue of Part 1, but different now. The silence had weight in it. Jaewon sat at the kitchen table. The Ixora plant was on the table. He had replaced it 4 times, quietly, without announcement, simply ensuring there was always one. She had noticed. She had said nothing except to touch it sometimes when she passed. He sat with a glass of water he wasn't drinking, and his phone face down, and he stared at nothing. He had been managing it perfectly. He had been at every session. He had worked in the treatment room and driven her home and cooked the things she could still stomach and held Sora during the hard afternoons and called his mother every 3 days with measured, reassuring updates. He had met with the oncologist alone once, without Adaz's knowledge, which she would have disapproved of, and which he had done anyway, because he needed to look the doctor in the eyes and ask the question he could not ask in front of her. What is the realistic outlook? Not the optimistic one. The realistic one. The doctor had looked at him carefully. Mr. Kwon, the realistic outlook is cautiously positive. The surgery results were better than we initially hoped. The tumor markers are responding to treatment. 57 is young for this diagnosis. She is fit and healthy and, frankly, she is one of the most disciplined patients we have treated in terms of compliance and attitude. And the risk. There is always risk. I won't tell you there isn't. But if you are asking me whether I expect her to watch her daughter grow up, my honest answer is yes. I do. He had nodded, thanked the doctor, walked to his car, sat in the parking structure for 8 minutes, then driven home. He had not told anyone about that conversation. Not Adaze, not Chisholm, not Minjun. He had carried it the way he carried everything, alone, internally, with the contained precision of a man who had spent 60 years treating his own emotions as classified information. And now, at the kitchen table at 12:30 in the morning, something he had been holding for 2 months ran out of room. He heard a sound from the hallway. Minjun appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had been staying in the guest room for the past week, initially at Adaz's invitation, subsequently because leaving had stopped feeling like a real option. He was 30 years old and he had his father's eyes, and he stood in the kitchen doorway at 12:30 in the morning and looked at a 62-year-old man sitting alone at a table with an untouched glass of water. He understood immediately. He didn't say anything. He went to the cabinet, found a second glass, filled it with water, and sat down across the table. They sat in silence for a long time, two men with the same jaw and the same instinct for quiet. One of them 62 and terrified of losing the person who had made him human again. The other 30, and only just beginning to understand what it felt like to have someone worth being terrified of losing. Minjun said, "She's going to be okay." Jae-won looked at him. "You don't know that?" "No," Minjun said. "But she told me something during the 4th session. She said, 'I'm not planning to go anywhere. I'm just being prepared.' And then she said, and I'm quoting exactly, 'Your father told me once to prepare to stay. I'm following his instructions.'" She said it like it was funny. Something moved in Jae-won's face. "She remembers everything," he said, almost to himself. "She remembers everything," Minjun agreed. A silence. Then Jae-won said something he had never said out loud to anyone. "I have faced everything in my life with a plan. I have never faced anything I couldn't outmaneuver or outlast or outbuild. I built an empire from nothing because I refused to be powerless. And this." His voice was measured, precise, losing precision at the edges. "This is the one thing I cannot build or buy or strategize around, and it is the one thing I cannot afford to lose." Minjun was quiet. Then, "You're not powerless, you're just present. Those are different things." Jae-won looked at his son. His 30-year-old son who had grown up without him, raised by a woman who worked 2 jobs, arriving in his life carrying 30 years of complicated feelings and a container of homemade stew, and apparently the specific kind of quiet wisdom that only comes from growing up learning to depend entirely on yourself. He said, "Your mother raised you well?" Minjun looked at the table. "She did. I'm sorry I wasn't there to help her." The words had no ornament, no qualification, no strategic framing. Just that. Minjun pressed his lips together briefly, looked up. "I know," he said. And it was not forgiveness exactly. Not yet. It was something more honest than forgiveness, and more useful. The acknowledgement of 2 people deciding that what is left matters more than what was lost. They sat at the table until 2 in the morning, talking about things that had no agenda. Minjun's mother, his childhood in Incheon, the jobs he had worked, the business degree he had completed at night school, the life he had built with no blueprint except her example. Jae-won listened the way Adai's had taught him to listen, twice as long as he spoke. By the time they went to bed, nothing had been resolved and everything had shifted. The way the most important conversations always work. Chisom arrived from Lagos on a Sunday. She arrived with 2 suitcases, 4 containers of homemade Nigerian food, a list of traditional remedies that she was ready to defend against any oncologist who questioned them, and an energy that immediately reorganized the penthouse's emotional atmosphere the way a warm front reorganizes weather. She took one look at the situation. Adezi, thinner and tired but still herself. Jae-won quietly managing everything with the controlled attentiveness of a man who had made his wife his full-time purpose. Sora pulling herself upright against the furniture with the determined physicality of a baby who had decided walking was already taking too long, and a 30-year-old Korean man eating breakfast at the kitchen table with the careful belonging of someone still learning that he was allowed to be there. She processed all of it in approximately 4 minutes. Then she put her suitcases down, walked to Minjun and said, "You have Jae-won's forehead and his mother's nose. It's very interesting. I'm Chisom. I'm the sister. Welcome to the family." Minjun blinked. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. The family is wonderful, but it is never boring, and things happen at a frequency that would exhaust a normal person. You'll need stamina." I gathered that from context. "Good. Can you cook?" "1 dish." "What dish?" "Doenjang jjigae." Chisom considered this. "Acceptable. I'll teach you jollof rice. Between the 2 of us, we can make sure Ada eats something with actual flavor during this treatment." From the sofa, Adai's said, "I can hear you planning around me." "We know. Chisholm and Minjun said simultaneously. They both appeared surprised by the simultaneity. Then Chisholm laughed, the warm, fully committed laugh of a woman who, after everything, after all of it, was watching her sister's strange and extraordinary family assemble itself in a Seoul penthouse kitchen on a Sunday morning and finding it, against every probability, exactly right. The final chemotherapy session was on a morning in autumn. Seoul was beginning its turn, the particular cool clarity that comes before the cold, the city wearing its best light, the Han River reflecting a sky that couldn't decide between blue and gold. Adaez wore her mother's earrings. She had worn them to every session, quietly, without announcement, the way she carried all her most important things. The gold bracelet on her right wrist, the earrings, the factory key in her bag, even in Seoul, even now. Jaewon drove her. Minjun met them there. Chisholm was on a video call from Lagos the entire 4 hours, technically working on foundation business while technically also being in the room. Sora was with Jaewon's mother now in Seoul for the duration, who had learned to operate the baby monitor and the bottle warmer and the specific bouncing motion that made Sora stop crying with the fierce, focused dedication of a 75-year-old Korean grandmother who had decided that nothing in her life had prepared her for this grandchild, and she was going to learn everything from scratch, and she was going to be excellent at it. The last session was 4 hours. Jaewon worked, checked on her, worked. Minjun sat across from Adaeze, and they did what they had begun doing at every session, talking, properly. The way she had said they should from the beginning, without agenda, without performance, without anyone trying to be what the other needed, rather than just being what they were. He had told her things about his mother she would never tell anyone else. She had told him things about Emeka, properly, fully, for the first time, that she had not told even Chisholm in their entirety. They had become, in the strange, compressed intimacy of treatment rooms, something that had no existing name. Not mother and stepson, not friends. Something particular to them. Two people who had arrived in the same family from completely different directions and found, to their mutual surprise, that they understood each other in a way that required very little translation. When the final bag finished and the nurse began removing the line, Adaeze sat up slowly. She looked at her arm. At the mark that would fade, she thought about everything this year had held, the way her mother had done when Adaeze was 22 and overwhelmed and needed to be reminded that she was not alone. Minjun went very still. He was 30 years old, and he had never had a father, and his mother had been gone for 3 years, and he had arrived in this family like a question without an answer, and found, against all probability, something he had stopped believing he was allowed to want. He said, "I'm glad you're okay." "So am I," she said. "I have a lot of things to still do, including watching you figure out what you're going to do with your half of this impossible family." He almost smiled. "My half? Sora is going to need someone to complain to about her parents. That seems like a position for an older brother." This time he fully smiled. It was the first time. It was remarkable. It was exactly his father's smile, the one that came rarely and meant something when it arrived. That evening, the penthouse. The full family gathered around a table that had been extended to accommodate everyone. Jaewon's mother, Chisholm, Minjun, Adaez, Jaewon, and Sora in her high chair at the end, currently redistributing sweet potato across a surprisingly wide radius. The table held food from 2 continents. Chisholm's jollof rice beside Minjun's doenjang jjigae, beside Jaewon's mother's japchae beside the fried plantain that Adaez had insisted on making herself despite everyone's protests, standing in the kitchen for 45 minutes while 3 people hovered anxiously in the doorway. The plantain was perfect. She had made it perfectly. Of course she had. After dinner, after the table was cleared and Sora was asleep and the Seoul night was blazing beyond the penthouse windows, Jaewon said he wanted to say something. Everyone looked at him. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He placed a document on the table. He said, "This is an amendment to the Kwon Empire Founding Charter. I had it drawn up 3 weeks ago." He looked at Minjun. "It formally recognizes Kwon Minjun as a Kwon heir, equal standing with Sora Amara in all matters of succession, legacy, and family record. It cannot be contested or reversed. It is done. Min Jun stared at the document. Jae-won said, I cannot give you 30 years. I cannot apologize enough for what those 30 years cost you. I cannot fix what your mother carried alone. I cannot be the version of myself that should have been present for all of it. His voice was controlled, absolutely controlled. And underneath the control, something large and real and permanent. But I can give you every year that is left, every resource, every part of this family that is mine to give. If you'll let me. The table was quiet. Min Jun looked at the document for a long time. Then he looked up at Adai's. She said nothing. She simply met his eyes, steady, clear, completely without agenda, and let him decide. He looked at Jae-won. The two men looked at each other across the table, 62 and 30, the same jaw and the same watchful dark eyes and the same quality of going quiet when something mattered most. And in that look was everything that would take years to fully say. A father's guilt, a son's grief, the gap between them, the bridge. Min Jun put his hand on the document. He said, She's going to need an older brother who can cook. Chisholm burst into tears immediately and completely, the way she had burst into tears at every significant moment of this entire story, which was exactly right. Jae-won's mother laughed. A Korean grandmother's laugh, short and warm and completely genuine. Adai's pressed her grandmother's bracelet to her lips and looked at the table. At all of it, every person at it, and thought about her mother and her grandfather and Emeka and a boardroom in Lagos and a dinner table in Seoul and a factory at dawn and a hospital garden in autumn. She thought, everything that was taken from you was only ever making room. She looked at her husband. He was already looking at her. He mouthed across the table in Igbo, badly pronounced, the Igbo of a 62-year-old Korean man who had been learning since the year their daughter was born, who would be learning for the rest of his life because that was who he was. Dalu? Thank you. She shook her head slowly, smiling. You mispronounced it, she said. I know, he said. I'm working on it. 6 months later. Spring returned to Seoul the way it always does, suddenly, insistently, as if the city had decided that winter had gone on long enough. The rooftop garden was in full bloom. Ixora flowers, deep orange. Korean plum blossoms. The two of them growing beside each other the way they had for 2 years now. Not competing, not requiring each other to be something different, simply sharing the same space and light, and finding that there was enough of both for all of it. Adaeze sat at the small table. Her hair was growing back. The chemo had taken it, and she had worn it with the same composure she wore everything, and now it was returning, soft and close-cropped, and Jae-won had told her once quietly that she was the most beautiful she had ever been. She had told him he was biased. He had said, completely. It doesn't change the fact. She was reading. Sora, 15 months old, walking now with the magnificent, unsteady confidence of someone who had decided that bipedalism was non-negotiable. Came through the rooftop door at a determined totter, reached the table, grabbed her mother's knee, and said her second word. Her first word had been Appa, the Korean for father, which Jae-won had received with an expression so overwhelmed he had had to leave the room briefly. Her second word was Ne, Igbo for mother, which Adaeze had received by pressing her face into her daughter's neck and staying there for a very long time. Now Sora looked up at her mother, grabbed her knee and said, Ma. Close enough. Adaeze lifted her daughter into her lap. Below the rooftop, somewhere in the penthouse, she could hear 2 voices, Jae-won's and Min Jun's, in conversation. The low, slightly formal register they had started with, gradually becoming something warmer. They were talking about the Foundation's new Lagos expansion. Min Jun had joined the board 3 months ago, bringing a perspective on ground-level community development that Jae-won told Adaeze privately, was better than anything his own teams had produced. He got it from his mother, Jaewon had said. He got some of it from you, Adaze had replied. I'm choosing to believe that. You should. It's true. She sat on the rooftop with her daughter in her lap, and the Ixora flowers and the plum blossoms, and the whole of Seoul blazing below. She was 57 years old. She had waited 30 years, buried one love, built an empire from her grandfather's fabric and her mother's fury. She had walked into the most dangerous room in South Korea with her chin up and her grandmother's bracelet on. She had carried a miracle and disappeared, and come back and told the truth, and sat in chemotherapy chairs, and held her family together at its most fractured and most whole. She pressed the bracelet to her lips. She thought about her mother. Don't give yourself to anyone who doesn't understand what they are receiving. He understood. He had learned. He was learning still. Every day. Imperfectly. With the intense, focused commitment he gave everything. The Korean billionaire learning Igbo and learning fatherhood and learning what a son is when you receive one at 62 and learning over and over how to be present instead of powerful. She heard the rooftop door. He came through it with 2 cups of tea. Darjeeling, always Darjeeling. The research he had done on her before they met had included this, and he had never stopped. And sat down across from her. He looked at his daughter in her arms, then at his wife. The evening light caught the silver in his hair, the particular stillness behind his eyes that she had first noticed across a dinner table and had spent 3 years learning the full language of. He handed her the tea. She took it with her bracelet hand. He looked at her for a long moment, the way he had been looking at her since the beginning. Like a man who has found the thing he did not know he was looking for and has no intention of looking away. How are you feeling? He asked. She considered the question, properly, the way she did everything. Like someone who has been given back something she almost lost, she said, and is paying attention this time. He nodded slowly. Then he reached across the table, took her hand, held it the way he always held it, firmly, without drama, the grip of a permanent decision. Below them, Seoul burned gold in the last of the evening light. Inside the penthouse, Minjun laughed at something. A real laugh, increasingly frequent, increasingly his own rather than cautious. Sora reached for her father's cup with the confident grasping of someone who has decided all objects within reach are hers. And Kwon Jae-won, 62 years old, the most powerful and most humbled man in South Korea, looked across a rooftop full of Ixora flowers at the woman who had walked into his dangerous room and changed the entire direction of his life and said the only word that contained everything. Stay. She looked at him. I'm here, she said. I'm not going anywhere. And she meant it. Completely, with the full settled weight of a woman who had survived everything it took to be able to say it. I'm here. Of the story. Of the waiting. Of all the years that were only ever making room. He built an empire from grief. She built a legacy from fabric and faith. Between them, a daughter named Sky and Grace. A son who arrived 30 years late and exactly on time. A family assembled from 2 continents and 1 impossible love. He had been the most dangerous man in South Korea. She had been the most patient woman in the world. And together they proved the only thing that was ever worth proving. That everything taken from you was only ever making room. The Kwon family story is complete. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying. Subscribe, like, and share. It doesn't cost anything. This is the only way you can help this channel grow. We love you.